Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Giant Leaps for Brandkind. Today, I have Mark Stouse from Proof Analytics. And we had such a good reaction to our first episode about marketing measurement and brand measurement that we thought we would talk about it a little bit more. And Mark is here to help us do that. So, welcome to the podcast, Mark. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, it's great to be here. Thank
Oh,
you so much.
thank you. Well, let's just give everybody a little bit of background. So, how did you get where you are today? Why did you launch Proof?
So I once upon a time, 20 years ago, I was a marketing leader, like pretty much all marketing leaders in large companies. Had a lot of the same ideas and made a lot of the same mistakes, had a lot of the same successes, right? All that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I worked for the CEO of HP at that time, a guy named Mark Hurd.
Mm-hmm.
And Mark was an ops genius and a former sales leader and very customer facing. And he held marketing to a very high standard, and he would get in our face,
Oh, wow.
literally and metaphorically.
So, what years was this? Was this like a year where it
This
was
has been kind of like 2004,
okay, early
2005.
2000s? Yeah, it was a different world. The corporate world was a different world. That's when I started. And
Yeah,
yeah,
different world,
yeah,
and yeah, and so I mean, it kind of sucked.
yeah.
It really
It
did.
does suck to get chewed
And
out.
yeah, and you kind of get to an existential place where, in my case anyway, I started to say, look, I've either got to do something to fix this structurally, because that's one part of who I am,
Mm-hmm.
or I just got to go somewhere else, do something completely different, and just get out of this whole thing,
Well,
right?
so what did you need to fix? What were you getting chewed out for?
Inability to show value,
Okay.
inability to. I mean, Hurd was like, "Man, you're spending a lot of money,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
What am I getting for this? What's
Yes.
the time scale against which I should expect to be seeing something coming back the other way?
Yep.
How are we even going to know that it was you as opposed to something else over here, right? I
Yes.
mean, and so I went home one weekend. I mean, this sounds kind of like apocryphal, but it's really not,
Yeah.
right? I went home one weekend, and I remembered that I had my college math books in a box in my garage, and
Okay.
I went and found them, and and they were nearly pristine,
Because you had never
right?
cracked them open.
No, not really. And so I started reading them with a level of interest that I had never really had before,
Yeah.
and I started to learn a lot, and then I had a conversation with Hurd, and he's like, "Yeah, okay." He said, "Now we're getting somewhere,
Yeah.
right?" And so he took advantage of the HP mentor program, which was really sacred inside of HP at that time,
Uh-huh.
probably still is. And he gave me the CFO of HP, a guy named Bob Wayman,
Uh-huh.
as my mentor,
Okay.
and said, Bob's going to show you everything that you need to know about what he wants you to connect to, cause and effect, back and forth, right?
Okay.
And that was absolutely just a phenomenal experience that did require me to humble myself, and I did not particularly like that at that time because I was kind of cool, you know, uh, and but it turned out to be some of the best things that ever happened to me. And so I kind of got onto this curve, right? And I started really running large programs with causal analytics. Um, and I kept on getting hired into higher and higher positions in different companies. Finally, um, the chairman of Honeywell International recruited me. Uh, this has been like, this is like 2011.
Okay. So
to
right
be the
post the Great Recession, right afterwards.
Mhm.
Okay.
To come in and be the CMO of Honeywell Aerospace, which was roughly $14 billion enterprise within
Not
Honeywell.
bad.
And so we ran the whole thing globally based on causal analytics, and did it very, very successfully, to the point where we got called out by him on earnings calls and things like that. Um, but I was spending a lot of money.
Yeah.
I was spending $10 million a year just
Okay.
on the analytics, and it was mainly because we didn't have the. In order to get the insights from the analytics fast enough to make good decisions fast enough,
Okay.
right? We had to hire an enormous number of data scientists and data analysts. So it was very much of a brute force solution. And you didn't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that automation was probably going to be a really important piece of the next step. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's what happened. We ultimately, some compadres of mine and I, um, left our respective roles and went and created Proof, and spent 3 years building it. And we've been in the market about 3.5 years, and it is it's done really well. We're major partners with AWS, and we're
Mm-hmm.
major partners with Salesforce.
Okay. That's an incredible story. I'm going to back it up a little bit and break it down for the lay people in the audience, including
Great, that's
myself.
awesome. Sure, yeah.
So, okay, causal
Oh, including me.
analytics. Yes, including all of us, right?
Right,
Um,
that's right.
Causal analytics. So that isn't a term that everyone hears every day. So could you define how do you define causal analytics?
So you're right. I mean, that's a term of art, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the phrase that everybody's familiar with, right, is cause and effect.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some principles around this that are kind of like the laws of gravity, right? And as you and I were talking about beforehand, right? It kind of is what it is, and if you don't agree with it, if you don't like it, it doesn't. These principles, like gravity, don't care, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit of a. It's a little bit totalitarian, right? And from a certain perspective, but that's kind of what the laws of physics tend to be.
Mm-hmm.
So we are talking about um, data measurement, okay,
Mm-hmm.
is always and only about the past.
Right?
Okay, so in order for you to be able to measure something, it has to have already happened,
Yes, of course.
right? In addition, past is not prologue.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't say, well, it's always been this way.
Right.
Okay, so that means it's going to be this way for the next 12 months, right?
Right. Because
I
context
mean, I think
change. The future, we don't know what's going to
yeah,
happen. Yeah.
COVID alone, I think, showed people how that doesn't work,
Right.
right? Um, the spiking cost of cash, interest rates, all this kind of stuff for the last 2 years also, you know. So one of the other principles here is that in any given situation that you're trying to understand, 2/3, maybe even 70% of it is made up of stuff you don't control.
Of course.
It's the wave that
Mm-hmm.
you are seeking to surf.
Mm-hmm.
And your job is to surf the wave as best as you possibly can,
Right.
right? Knowing that, probabilistically speaking, um, you have a chance of finishing with a flourish on the beach, and you have a chance of wiping out,
Right.
right? And so, because the world, certain parts of the world, physics, for example, law of gravity is a great example of this, we experience deterministically, right? Which means the same way every time, yada, 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 right?
Mhm.
But as soon as human beings get involved in an equation, it becomes radically probabilistic, which means we're bookies. We're constantly running the odds
Placing
on
bets.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, placing bets. Exactly.
Yep.
We are placing bets, right?
Right.
So cause and effect, right? Cause and effect is all about helping you. If you understand the causes and the effects and the network of all that kind of stuff and how it all comes together, right? Then you will be able to place a better bet than if you don't.
Right.
And so that's really what causal analytics is. And it's been around for ages, right? I mean, actually, part of an algorithm inside of proof was written by Aristotle.
Beautiful.
Okay, so that should kind of tell everybody just how long people have been caring about causes and effects,
There
right?
you go.
But that's really what it is. And so today, businesses and go to market teams in particular, but also other teams, right, are saying, hey, man, things on the outside are changing so fast. There's so much volatility, and it's changing the way that what we do
Hmm.
is having an effect over here.
Hmm.
And if we don't understand that, and if we can't calibrate that, if we can't keep up with that, right, we're going to get caught out.
Hmm.
We will end up spending money we shouldn't have spent in some way, wasting it. We will end up missing great opportunities where if we'd spent a little bit more money in certain areas, we could have really made serious coin.
Yeah.
So that's really what this is all about.
So, okay, this unpacks a couple of things for me, which I think all of the marketing leaders and tech leaders out there probably need to hear. And it's sometimes it's this unspoken truth kind of lying underneath of the surface.
Yep.
Every marketing leader everywhere, I mean, and you are incredibly tenured as a marketing leader, right? No one, regardless of the level of experience, expertise, multidimensionality, whatever you're bringing to the table, no one can get it right all the time. No one, because of the
That
changing,
is absolutely true.
right, because of the
Yeah.
changing context. And I think that the frustration, a lot of times you'll see a tension, especially in early companies, where the founder, the CEO is looking at the marketing leader and saying, well, you had 15 years of experience, 20 years of experience, 30 years of experience, and you've got this great resume. What can you, why can't we get this perfect kind of thing?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times, and I've been really honest throughout my career as I've kind of, for better or worse, as I've reached the higher levels of marketing leadership, and I've said, I can I can make bets for you. I can try, I can learn, and I can continually improve. And
Right.
that's what I can do as a marketing leader for you. I cannot promise you perfection. And that's really hard. We are it's not like engineering where you can get things very precise. You can place a bet, learn from that bet, and then try to place a better bet.
Marketing is not a vending machine,
Right.
right?
Right.
Uh, and there's a lot of, particularly in the startup world,
Mhm.
right? There's a lot of VCs and a lot of founders who have wanted it to be a vending machine.
Yes. It's very
They wanted it,
frustrating for a lot of
and
people.
that's right. And they have positioned marketing in particular as part of a supply chain
Mhm.
for sales,
Yes.
right?
You're right.
But here's the problem: marketing, and there are other functions inside of corporations that have this as well,
Mhm.
right? Marketing is a non-linear multiplier
Mhm. Mhm.
of performance of other functions.
Mhm. Okay.
All
Explain
right.
that. Unpack that a little bit for us.
Okay, so sales.
Mhm.
Sales creates value on a linear function. What does that mean? It means that if I go to my CRO and say, guess what? I'm doubling your goal for the balance of the year.
Mhm.
very next conversation that we're going to have is he's going to want to know how I plan to help him double his sales team,
Hmm.
because there's a linearity of relationship between the number of sales guys and the amount of quota that can be carried.
Right. More
Okay.
money in, you put more money in, you get more money out. Right.
Right. Well,
Easy.
theoretically,
Easy.
yeah, we hope. Yeah. And so marketing, on the other hand, is nonlinear,
Hmm.
which basically means it brings leverage. In fact, it was created, modern marketing. You go back to the early academic papers on marketing in, say, 1910 to 1920, certainly pre-depression, right? You're going to see this language all over the place.
Hmm.
They had reached a point of saturation on just sales.
Hmm.
Just
Hmm.
sales couldn't do any more than just sales had been doing,
Yes.
right? And this was also the time when all of a sudden radios started coming on, and newspapers were more and more of a thing, and all this kind of
Photographs.
stuff.
Hmm.
Photographs, right?
Hmm.
And then, of course, not too much after World War II, TV, right? Things like this, right? So it's all about leverage. It's all about reaching people and impacting people at scale.
Hmm.
So, what does that mean? So, basically, time lag, there is a time lag
Yep.
effect between marketing and sales impact.
Hmm.
And what this really means in B2B, because the time lags can be quite substantial,
Yep.
right, is that marketing and sales create value asynchronously in time.
Hmm.
So, to put this really simply,
Yep.
sales performance in Q2 and marketing performance in Q2 have absolutely nothing to do with each other.
Right.
So if you go to the QBR and you're comparing marketing and sales performance in that past quarter, right, you are not doing it. You're not doing anybody any good.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and when you run the analytics, you see this. This is a part of the normal math around this kind of stuff, right? It calculates the time lag, right? So you're kind of like going, whoa, right? And you start to see why, for example, so many C suites got so down on brand investment,
Hmm.
right? Brand investment has some of the longest time lags going,
Hmm.
right? And it was further made a bigger problem, okay, because most marketers had no clue what those time lags were.
Hmm.
So everyone could sit around the table and everyone could agree that great marketing takes time.
Right. Right.
The very next question was, well, how much time? We don't know exactly.
Mm.
Well, that's a big problem.
Hmm.
If you're a business leader, that's huge.
Right.
That's non-trivial,
Of
right?
course. Of course.
So when you start talking about time lag and you start talking about multiple variables, like in many cases, a lot of variables,
Hmm.
variables that you don't control, variables that you do control, variables at different time lags. So, a great example of this, keeping it simple, okay,
Hmm.
is that life occurs in four dimensions: X, Y, and Z plus time. So if you ask me to come to a meeting on the eighth floor of the building at the corner of Walk and Don't Walk, but you never give me a time, the odds of us ever connecting are zero.
Right.
Same thing goes. I mean, you can say time, but not a floor, right? Right. And then I'm kind of like, well, am I going to walk every floor and hopefully luck out?
You'd have to really meet that person. Want to meet that person.
Right. And so the reality here is that you've got to have this intersection of causes and effects of parameters, decision parameters,
Hmm.
if you're going to really be able to do this. The amazing thing is, so this should make everybody who's a marketer listening to this feel just like $1 million. Okay.
I hope so.
When we run analysis time after time after time, right? Year one, which is where you really find most of your non-performing spend.
Hmm.
Okay, because after that you've already kind of taken it out, right? And so then you're kind of more like tweaking it constantly, right? So you don't have these big waste numbers after year one. But in year one, 20-25% is going to be underperforming or non-performing. Could be as high as 30 in some cases.
Okay.
Um, but I want you to think about, rather than getting fixated on that, I want you to think about how you got 70 to 75, maybe even 80% of it right
Hmm.
without any analytics. You did that purely intuitively based on your experience.
Right.
That's pretty damn good,
Right.
right? I mean, it's pretty funny because we sell to marketing and we sell a lot to finance, to FP&A teams.
Yep.
And the finance teams, they recognize what proof is a lot faster in most cases than the marketing teams do. And
Hmm.
they're like, you can see the little glimmer form in their eye, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it's like, we are finally going to put the screws to marketing, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And marketing is over there kind of going, right? And then the first analytics come back, and the finance guys are kind of going, huh, it's not quite as like
Bad
I
as we
thought it was,
thought. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then the marketers are over there lighting up cigars, going, yeah, well, we did the best we could without
We
really,
are pretty good.
without proof, right? Now we, come on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there is, you know, you the thing that I would just, big huge takeaway message: don't assume.
Of course. Well, that's just a good
Don't
message
assume.
for
It makes
life.
an ass out of you and me, right? I mean, it just really
Yeah.
does. You
Yeah.
know.
Well, and also, okay, so you've unpacked a couple more things. And I'm gonna try not to forget any of them as I repeat them back to you. So one, marketing as a profession. Um, the most successful marketers are using a lot of intuition, empathy, etc. These soft skills, and they're getting it pretty right. And you can learn and iterate and reduce the amount that is going wrong, right, with good analytics. But if you are honing all of those soft skills and looking at the data from your customers, your conversations, your feedback, maybe your social chat or whatever it is, a lot of those hunches are working in most cases, but you need a way to prove that back to your other members of your leadership team, finance, et cetera, et
Right,
cetera.
because all the stuff that you're talking about
Right.
is all inside baseball metrics,
Okay,
right?
give me that analogy. I need to hear this. Yeah. What do you mean
I mean,
inside baseball metrics?
these are metrics that mean something to marketers and mean absolutely nothing to anyone else.
Right, 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 right.
Furthermore, no one else cares.
Okay, okay.
Right?
I'm going to push back on that for 1 second. What I will say I've seen in these past couple of years are obsessions with vanity metrics that actually do nothing
No, that's
oftentimes
it.
for revenue, not
Yeah,
just from marketing teams but also from like founders. Like, we want to go viral on TikTok, and you're like, okay, I can make
yeah.
you go viral on TikTok probably with something funny or something whatever or trendy, but I don't know what this has to do with our bottom line.
No, it's the
And
truth.
right,
Yeah.
but there is an obsession even from the leadership perspective on this, like, going viral, the fame aspect of marketing, right?
Well, yeah. So I'll give you a really large company, so-called serious example.
Yeah.
So we did work some years ago for a very large technology company that was renowned for its Olympics presence.
Okay.
Um, and in truth, as pure production values and all that kind of stuff, they did an amazing job. I mean, there was just no question about it at all. They did a beautiful job, soup nuts, right?
Okay.
However, the CFO was, I mean, it cost a lot of money. I
Right.
mean, we're talking about several $100 million.
Yes, of course.
So the CFOs, the Olympics is over, and the bloom is off the rose a little bit, and all of a sudden, the CFO says, well, what did we get for all this? I mean, it was awesome. We all know it was awesome, but it's got to also, it can't just be awesome. It's got to pay. It's
Right.
got to pay
We
for
got to get that
itself,
money
right?
back tenfold if we can.
So he brought us in, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And at the last minute, I tell you what, why don't you give us some other things that you really care about to use as objectives, right? In goals, right?
Mhm.
Against this could possibly have had a benefit, right? So we did like recruiting and retention.
Mhm.
Turned out that it had phenomenal impact on recruiting and retention for about 9 months.
Okay. By
Okay,
phenomenal
like people
impact, do you mean like people were reaching, they had more applicants, they had more acceptance? Like,
more really high quality applicants, more
okay.
cool people wanted to come work for
Right.
them. People that would have been thought of as regrettable attrition, right? Didn't leave.
Okay.
So all that kind of stuff, and the cause and effects on this were just stone cold, right? I mean, it was inarguable, and
Yes.
indeed, no one argued it. However, it had no impact at all, none, on revenue.
Well, within what time frame though?
Within, say, 9 to 12 months.
Ooh, okay.
Now, when we started saying, okay, why would that be?
Mhm.
Okay, is when it actually became rather embarrassing.
Okay.
Because the reality is, there's two main realities in this situation. One, everybody who was watching, who was a decision maker on buying lots and lots of the product made by this company, right? B2B, okay,
Okay.
wasn't going to decide to buy from them based on the Olympics.
Okay.
That's number one.
Right.
Number two was most of the people watching the Olympics aren't
Aren't buyers.
buyers.
Yeah. Yep.
Right?
Gotcha.
So between these two things, right, it was a big goose egg,
Right.
big
Yeah.
goose egg, right?
The
And it
placement
got
wasn't right. It might have been a great campaign, but the placement wasn't right. And it sounds like the intention wasn't well defined because if you're doing a campaign at the Olympics, it's likely a brand driven campaign, right? Not an immediate CTA.
yeah. So it was so this is where the reality of marketing. A lot of B2B marketers like to segment the purpose of a campaign and say
Mm-hmm.
this is a brand campaign and this
Mm-hmm.
is a CTA or a so-called
Growth.
demand gen,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And the reality is it blends in the minds of everybody, right?
Right.
And so you can't really you can't say, well, this is only to make us look good.
Of
Because the
course.
very next
Yeah. Yeah.
step
Yeah.
is, then what's the profit motive for looking good,
Right. Right.
right?
Well,
And so
so
it's all
yeah.
got to monetize in the end, one way or the
Right.
other.
Right. Well, but typically you'll have, some tactics that you're deploying that have an immediate hook, right? We want to drive them back to this product on the site. So we've got this tool to get them there, whatever it is. And we typically think of those more as growth tactics in marketing. This is one of the problems with marketing right now. We do segment it like this. It's a big problem. So we think of that as a growth tactic. but that leaves a brand impression too, whatever that tactic was. And then on the other
Sure.
side, if we have what we think of as a brand campaign, well, if it's cool enough, people will be Googling us and, whatever it is. And it becomes a growth tactic as well. So yeah, we've gotten obsessed with this siloing of marketing. So you're correct. It's,
Also, I think that the other big issue here
mm,
there's so much conversation about this on LinkedIn right now. It's clearly very top of mind.
right.
Is that demand gen is something that customers do, not
Okay.
us,
Okay.
right?
What do you mean?
And and the analytics really show this, right? So, and this is where it also intersects with your ICP.
Okay.
So you're going to say, um, my ICP is made up of the, I don't know, 5%, whatever it is,
For the
of
sorry, I'm just going to pause you for a sec. For the non-marketers in the room, that's ideal customer profile for
right.
new startups. And sorry, go ahead. Keep going.
Well, or any even older business, more mature businesses, everyone has an ICP, right?
Right. But
You and
some
I,
people don't know what the acronyms are. So I try to slow
yeah, no,
marketers
no,
down.
you're good. No. So they are. So let's say it's kind of commonly surmised is
Yes.
probably a fair word.
Right.
Okay, that roughly 5% of the marketplace is actually in your ICP at any given time. The ICP is a fluid, highly permeable container, and people move in and out of your ICP. Okay. Um, and so what this really means is it's only when they decide they have a need they need to have a problem that needs to be fixed. And I think that clearly there's just a ton of evidence that this is in point of fact the case, right? I mean, there's so many things that whether it's in B2B or B2C, there's so many things for us to potentially be interested in, to
Mm-hmm.
potentially give mental availability to that we don't, right? We don't give it. And why is that? It's because we don't either have a need or have a desire, right?
Okay.
And so is it part of marketing's role to make me generally aware that something exists so that if I feel the need or feel the desire, then maybe that's going to pop up in my head, kind of like Coke, right? Yeah, sure. But I think also that's a far greater reality in high frequency B2C than in relatively low frequency B2B. So that now, okay, so what did VCs and founders do, say, 15 years ago, right? In
Okay.
B2B marketing, they recognized this to some degree, and they said, we are going to do marketing automation, and we're going to do a bunch of other stuff, and we're just going to bombard our customers, our prospective customers,
Right.
with stuff, right?
Material impressions. Yes. Yeah.
That's right. And we're
Right.
just
Like
going
the
to,
more we surround them, the more likely they are to think of us, to buy, et cetera, et cetera. That was the thinking. Okay.
The kind of deals that make you boogie.
Okay.
that's right.
I'm
That's
with
right.
you.
And it was early on reasonably successful. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But then the law of unintended consequences kicked into major gear, activating. So, what most people don't understand about GDPR in the EU is
Mm-hmm.
this had been a moribund, meaning totally inactive category of legislation for like 60 years, right? And all of a sudden, boom, it became a big deal. And they say in their preamble on the first new GDPR legislation, which was what, like 4 years ago or something,
Mm-hmm.
uh, that it was precipitated by the explosion of marketing automation.
Okay. But I want to pause that for a second because I think that so you've hit on something that this attitude still hasn't changed. in some
Correct.
companies.
It has not
So,
changed.
yeah, so I have worked with clients where they've asked me questions like, okay, why don't we just churn out a bunch of low value articles and flood the internet basically via our blog so
Mhm.
that we are just packing our site with keywords and we're getting all of these clicks from, like, this is still, and these are C-suite leaders. Or why don't we just double our paid spend on X social channel so that
Mhm.
they can't open it without seeing us, like, I'm still getting these questions.
Yeah,
So
no, you're absolutely right. And the problem with it is, of course, is that there is, particularly right now, it
mhm.
appears to work sometimes.
Smoke and mirrors a little bit. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
still, in a
Right.
short cycle, and they're typically asking for this in a short cycle context.
Okay.
They're
Yes.
trying to impact the quarter. Okay.
Right, 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 right. Yep.
Right. And so there is an illusion or a kind of one off kind of reality, um,
Right.
that it works, but then it's like any drug use, right? You
Yeah.
require more and more and more and more and more to get the same effect, right?
Right, right.
And it's highly inflationary.
Right. Well, it's like saying you need hip surgery, but instead you're taking a Percocet. It's
That's right.
got detriment to it as well. Because
Right.
what I keep telling founders is today's buyers, both on a B2C and B2B level, are far more sophisticated in how they view, take in, and understand marketing messages. They understand that they're being marketed to in a way that I think
Yeah.
previous
I think
generations didn't.
I think that I agree with that. I think that the other big thing though, and it's huge,
Mhm.
right, is that in B2B, the dominant issue
Mhm.
is risk mitigation.
Okay, tell me about that.
So if you look at the back half of the customer journey today in
Mhm.
B2B, it's all
Mhm.
about risk mitigation. It's
Okay.
all they literally don't care anymore about what you say about yourself. It's what the rest of the world, in quotes, right, says about you. And
Oh, covering your own butt for making this buying decision. That is what you're talking about.
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yes.
um, and the buying team, the existence of the buying team is
Mhm.
one of those things where it actually doesn't do anything for the risk levels of the corporation.
Mhm.
The risk that's being mitigated by the existence of the buying team is the people's risk.
Okay.
So if they're sharing the decision across 8 guys, okay,
Right. Right.
and it turns out to be a bad decision, they all can say, well, it wasn't just me, it was all these other seven. Everyone agreed. Everyone, so
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's a defensive play. It also dramatically lengthens out average deal velocity.
Right, but what you're saying assumes a couple of things, which unfortunately are sometimes, well, are still true in a lot of places. The fear of failure, right? So, like, when you are feeling unsupported in your role in a company or corporation, you're saying, okay, I'm going to democratize my decisions a little bit more
Right?
to,
Spread the
kind of
blame.
spread, right, if something goes wrong. Whereas, if you are a strong leader, yes, of course you get input from others, but you say, based on my expertise, this is my strong recommendation. You can take a little bit more ownership of that, right? Which is,
Right.
yeah,
But I think in just in fairness, right?
yeah,
In the current, particularly in the current reality, and particularly the current reality with regard to marketing,
yeah, yeah,
um, the number of organizations where that kind of psychological safety exists is
few and far between.
very few and far between.
Okay, okay.
People are scared to death.
to lose their jobs and their livelihood. Yeah. Okay. Let's unpack that. That's a hairy question, and I think marketing job security and obviously effectiveness, but also job security is closely tied to being able to prove your results and therefore have strong analytics, proof analytics, if you will.
Yeah.
um right, so all of this stuff is tied together. But here's a big hairy question slash reality. Back to what you were saying earlier, to your earlier point, you've got short-term tactics and you've got long-term tactics in any successful marketing program, right? You
Correct.
have quote unquote brand investment, if you want to call it that, that changes the hearts and minds, increases your awareness, increases your potential customer base because you're getting in front of more people, increases internal benefits such as lowering turnover, making it easy to court new talent, etc. So all of this stuff that brand does. And then you have, what we might call growth right now. Maybe we'll just call this all marketing again in the future. But you've got these individual campaigns with these hooks and these tools to get people interacting with your product, learning about your product. You've got sales enablement, etc., that provides your sales team with the tools and resources they need to chase those deals at the, further down the funnel. So, you've got all these pieces and you see results in these pieces in different time frames, right?
Right.
So it is
Which actually is the main distinction that is people are attempting to make between so-called brand and demand,
right. Yeah.
right? Long cycle investments, short cycle investments.
Right. Right. But there's this overemphasis, I think, on short cycle investments sometimes because people are scared
Yes.
to take those long cycle investments because they're worried about, again, covering their own butts, like you said. you know,
Right.
they
And,
don't,
and,
nobody,
and
yeah,
yeah, no, you're right. I mean, you're absolutely right. And
right.
if you can't calculate it,
Market determines whether you're going to fail or succeed more than anything else.
because you don't know that the whole system has been existing forever to
Yeah,
calculate it, and that large B2C marketing teams live according to this kind of analytic, right?
right.
Um, then you're up a creek without a paddle, right? I mean,
Right, right.
you won't know, and so when if you're talking to your so when I went to work for Honeywell,
Mhm,
the chairman of Honeywell, CEO of Honeywell.
mhm.
Um, I had my first interview with him, and after the little pleasantries and inviting me to sit down, all that kind of stuff, he just said, "Well, let's get right to it. I hate,
Okay.
I hate brand."
If I had a dollar for every time I've heard that. I'm
And
not a
I said,
brand person. I'm not They think of brand, they think of like the purses with the GG Gucci logo. They think that's what brand is.
right.
So what do you say? What do you say? Give it to me, Mark. Tell me. What do you say to that?
Well, I said I've read your position on brand, and if I agreed with your definition of brand, I would feel exactly the same way that you do.
Oh, that's a good answer.
But I said the fact of the matter is that your definition of brand, is wrong.
Right.
And he kind of looked at me and I said, look, you're busy. I'm busy. Don't you want to find out whether this is meant to be like in the next 10 minutes as opposed to, both of us giving an hour and then finding out at the end that have this irreconcilable difference?
Uh-huh.
And he kind of, he kind of laughed. Right. And he goes, okay, so what's your definition of brand?
Uh-huh.
And I said, well, it's brand reputation is what really matters. I said, brand is what you say about yourself. Brand reputation is what everybody else believes about what you said about yourself.
Okay.
And it's the brand reputation exemplified in three, and this is all over research, I actually having nothing to do with brand per se. It's about how people make decisions, particularly high stress, high cost, high
Mhm.
risk decisions.
Mhm.
Three psychographics that really matter: awareness,
Mhm.
confidence, and
Mhm.
trust.
Yep,
Right?
I agree.
And so if you have high confidence and trust, right, you are going to do really, really well. That's going to be grease on the wheel of your business, and you're going to not only do more deals, you'll do bigger deals, and you'll do faster average time to close on those deals.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And those three things all relate to directly, almost one to one, right, to revenue, margin, and cash flow,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I said, so that's what really matters. And he kind of,
Right.
and I said, and it really matters in aerospace. I mean, we're talking
Yeah.
about death, right? I mean, come on, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, you know, why don't we just call it reputation? He said, I just can't get past the whole brand word, right?
Yeah.
And I said, you know what? It's fine. It's all good. If you want to call it reputation, right? Call it reputation.
Right. Right. You know, I've actually I've said that to CEOs before. Instead of thinking it of it as brand, just think of it as your reputation. Think of those words as interchangeable. I think it is. So I want to unpack a couple of things about that. Um, that reputation is not just what people say about you, it is also their gut reaction
Oh, very much so.
to the mention of your company. Human beings, we, not to get into the issues, so some people might not believe we evolved from monkeys, whatever. Our brains are monkey brains. So I hope I don't offend anybody by saying that. Um, Still reacts a lot on what we consider our gut instinct, which is our emotional cortex. It is our emotional reaction to whatever decision is in front of us, right? And so your brand, your reputation, if you will, is prepping your potential customer to have a positive or negative emotional reaction, which will greatly influence their buying decision. And I think that can't be understated, but I have had a hard time in the past really, you know, unpacking that value for business leaders without seeing their eyes glaze over. It's
So
very
this,
difficult.
so yes, so this is actually where an analytic is worth 1,000 words, right?
Okay, tell me about it.
So when you can show the marginal impact of a particular thing in a circumstance, right? Like
Hmm.
we add this in, right? What happens? What's the difference between? It's like an A/B test, right?
Of
What
course.
what's the difference between having it in or not having it in,
Hmm.
right? Strong brand reputation, okay, is monstrously huge in terms it's probably one of the few things that we don't control, because I want to really kind of get this part of it across, right? This is when we all as marketers say we don't own our brand, our customers own our brand, which is true.
Hmm.
This is what we really are talking about, whether we realize it or not, right?
Right.
We're talking about the fact that brand reputation is not something we can buy awareness. We cannot buy confidence and trust.
Right.
We,
Right. Right.
we
Right.
earn it. We earn it, right?
Right.
And it is ultimately a headwind or a tailwind on our business as much or more so than any interest rate, any macroeconomic feature, anything else, right?
Right.
So it's going to speed you up or slow you down. It's going to intensify the effects of what you're doing, or it could retard the effects of what you're doing because people are seeing your marketing, right? And they're going, yeah, but they're a bunch of scumbags and I don't like them and I wouldn't do business with them anyway. So then what's the value of that?
Right. Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, and here's okay. So, brand reputation. Marketing is not the only okay, we're often responsible for it and we're
Right.
working
I
so
know where
hard
you're
to
going.
improve it.
I'm totally with you.
So, but okay, but every decision the CEO makes outside of marketing
Right.
also affects that reputation. If you hire a bunch of skeevy salespeople, I cannot, as your marketing leader,
Yeah.
overcome that. I can't do anything about
Yeah,
it. If
actually,
you don't build a great product, you know?
I'll give you a worse case.
Okay, tell me about it.
Okay. You build a crappy product, you have crappy sales guys,
Yes.
whatever. Okay. But you have
Yes.
outstanding marketing.
Yeah.
All that you're going to successfully do is make sure that everybody knows that you have a crappy product and crappy sales guys faster.
Right, because they're going to put together these great campaigns to get all of this attention,
Right.
drive people to either these salespeople or the product. If they get past the salespeople, they'll have a terrible experience that was unfortunately out of the marketer's hands. Sometimes, as the marketer, you're kind of gently coaching and guiding. Oh, we need to work on this part of the product. Oh, have we thought about this in the sales team? Without trying to step on toes, but yet you have no control over that, right? As the marketer.
No,
So,
but you don't have to have control. You just have
right,
to have accountability.
right, of
You know what
course.
I mean by that is you don't have control over the interest rates either,
Right, right,
right? But you can model it all so that everybody is very clear about what's really going on.
right. And let them come to their own conclusions, right? Like, here's our data. Here's how our piece of the pie worked. If sales aren't increasing, or we're not, or we're getting a lot of, um, you know, we're churning customers, then there are some other areas of the business we need to investigate,
That's
right?
right. That's right. I
So,
mean, this is also why, just to kind of further make this point for just a second,
yeah,
it's not done well, okay, typically. And actually, I'm on a committee with National Association of Advertisers, or the ANA, right?
yeah,
That,
yeah,
to work on this, but brand equity, okay,
yeah.
is not something that's carried in some sort of marketing area. It's
Mm-hmm.
carried on the balance sheet of the corporation.
Mm-hmm.
And brand reputation is the it's an amalgam of everything that the corporation is doing or not doing.
Right.
And so it's actually a complete mistake to think of it as a uniquely marketing thing.
Yes, I agree with you. I agree with you.
And in fact, and I just finished several hundred Fortune 1000 CEO, CFO interviews from my book, and
Yeah.
we discussed a lot of this. And the point that I was making, and had some very interesting responses to on both sides of the equation,
Yeah.
was, if anything, brand is the responsibility of the freaking CEO.
It's true. It's true. Here's something that's been on my mind lately. Can I just unpack? I want to hear your opinion about this.
Sure.
When you talked about internal brand, you talked about your previous client who did the big Olympic campaign, and it didn't have this big revenue driver, and maybe there were mistakes that were made along the way, but it did have this big internal brand effect, less attrition, easier recruiting, etc., which is, I don't know how much they were willing to invest in that. If they would have known, that would have been the only outcome, but anyways, that is still a positive outcome in some respect, right?
Yes, it is.
What I don't think that a lot of business leaders right now realize, there has been a culling of talent in the past couple years there, and it's getting pretty brutal. You get on LinkedIn and you hear stories. I was laid off when I was 8 months pregnant. I given an email over an email on maternity leave. There is this culling of people that is happening, and the stories are coming out, and people are being very transparent about it, and the brutal layoffs happen, overhiring happens. I understand there are a lot of business reasons, and business owners can't avoid this sometimes, but I think that they don't realize that their brand reputations are really suffering, based on the way people are being laid off over the past couple of years. And have you ever approached that with or studied that with a client and said, "Hey, after you guys made these business decisions, and I know these were hard decisions, this is what happened to your brand. And this is what happened to your recruiting, in the next couple of years when you needed talent. And this is what happened to your, revenue over the next couple of years because people are this is hurting your brand reputation." Is this something that you've gotten into or, you
Yes.
know?
Yeah. No,
Okay.
I can give you a real life example, right?
Oh, geez, please do.
So what was it? I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago was when United Airlines had its big problem. The violence on board and
Oof.
all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, right? And
Yeah.
people were really upset. I mean,
Right.
a lot of people were really
Right.
upset, and yet during the ensuing year plus, right, their revenues went up, their profitability went up, their attractiveness as a employer went up,
Okay.
their stock price went up and up and up and up.
Uh-huh.
And so we were helping understand some of this, right?
Mhm.
And this all comes down to people's priorities and an economic idea called elasticity.
Okay.
And so, putting it in really conversational terms,
Mhm.
what was actually happening is that no matter how pissed off you were at United, no matter how many conversations you had where you said, I will just never fly them ever again, no matter what,
Mhm.
if you had to go somewhere and they were one of two or three airlines that went there,
Mhm.
and they had the best price and the best times for you,
Mhm.
you would typically pick United.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. And so the scary lesson in my
Mhm.
view, okay, was that they learned how little impact outrage had on them, short, medium, and longer term. And
Mhm.
so today, if it were all to happen again, it would be totally relegated to a corporate comms person and a lawyer to manage. And otherwise, the C suite and the board wouldn't even care.
So, our lesson here is with all of this going on, we don't think that big companies are going to take a hit regardless
No,
of
I think
the
so.
people outrage.
What I said after, but I think you had cut out was
Oh, so
it's
sorry.
this is why it's very situational, right? So
Okay.
in some
Yeah.
in some cases it's going to be hugely impactful, and in other cases it's not going to be impactful at all, and in some cases
Yeah.
it's going to be somewhere in the middle, right? And you just have to. This is where you cannot just assume based on experience and intuition that you know what is going to happen,
Right, right, right.
and so, but it's not hard at all. It's really not, to build a model and look at it and say, okay, I understand it like a lot better. It's not perfect because there is no perfection in this world, right? But is it that I just make, do I now have the basis to make a much better decision than I did without it? Yeah, you bet.
Right, right. So this is the way I look at this. I think like when you and this is just my intuition speaking, I examine my own behavior when I'm thinking about it. And I think that a lot of people, if they did examine their own behavior a little bit more, it can give you some good clues about what people might do, right? So if you're angry at a company, if you're saying you don't like something that someone said or done, you've seen something and you're feeling an emotional reaction that is negative, and that space is crowded, right? Which a lot of spaces are, like fintech, for instance. You've got a million options for how you, for instance, collect payment, an invoicing app you want to purchase, right? You've got a million options now.
Right.
one of them pissed you off, well, you're definitely going to go with something else because you've got so many other options and they're similar in price and, blah blah blah. And you might even go as far as to tell your friends, "Oh, well, I don't use that one anymore because have you heard about this thing? That guy's a jerk." Or this happened to me and that was terrible. Um, but like you said, if there aren't that many options, like airline, obviously high barrier to entry for that industry. It's really hard to get a good, successful airline up and running and then build the trust with your customer, et cetera, et cetera. So they don't have that many options. And it is a very expensive, you know,
Well,
product that
and
they're
it's
selling.
also it's further complicated
Right.
by something called, that we all have heard about in the last several years. We all know that it exists, right?
Mm-hmm.
The whole deal around virtue signaling,
Yeah. Yeah.
because people, it's super easy to lip off, right?
Oh, yeah.
It costs
Yeah.
you nothing to go, oh, those bastards, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
it's a whole nother thing to actually inconvenience yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of flying direct and being there when I want to be there, I'm willing to take two stops and be there, 6 hours later. And it's going to cost me a little bit more money. I mean,
Right.
you got to really have a strong moral position about it
Yeah.
to make that choice. And most people don't have. And they also know that they are not observed making that choice. They'll never be
Right. 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 Right.
treated for the hypocrisy of it, right? So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So actual buying behavior does not always align with the exterior personas that we're projecting. I might project myself as this. It helps define me. And that's a product of our time because right now we've got this like hero complex going on. Like we all have some sort of flag that we're flying, et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes to my buying decision, maybe especially with B2B, I go with the safest thing and it doesn't matter that campaign pissed me off or whatever it is, because this is going to be the thing I don't get in trouble for. And so it gives me more job security, et cetera. So it's a complex, that buying decision is complex
yeah, hey,
and
the reason why
we
we
can't
structured our
overweigh any
pricing the
one
way we
thing.
did, onboarding, a bunch of other parts of the whole thing for proof, um, was to remove risk, right? It's not just about making it easier, it's about removing the stuff that people are worried about. Right. And it's also, it's not just about touches or metrics or, like if you're familiar with so-called touch based attribution, right?
Yeah.
That's not, I mean, is it helpful to have a really accurate record of the patterns in your customer journey? Sure,
Hmm.
absolutely. Can you extrapolate off of that into budget optimization and ROI and relative contribution and all that kind of stuff? No, you can't. It's one of the reasons why MTA is starting to fall down as a category. It's one of the reasons why, like, Adobe just essentially took its MTA system and rebuilt it, attempting to kind of reskin it as marketing mix modeling
Hmm.
because the MTA was going nowhere fast.
Well, we never perfected attribution anyway, right? We always waited, and there are things that you can't digitally track.
Yeah,
There are touches.
but the real issue is
Hmm.
attribution is the wrong word.
Right, right, right,
Okay,
right, right.
because
Yeah.
attribution is all about causality,
Right.
right? So when you do touch-based systems, you're looking at effects and you are surmising
Hmm.
causes. But
Yeah.
also there's no
Okay.
time lag involved in that, right?
Right, right, right. Yep.
The weightings that you put on the system, which are essentially a proxy for causality, right?
Hmm.
are all your opinion,
Yeah.
right? So I mean, it's got huge issues with it, right? And there's an old phrase that having criticized the living heck out of MTA in the last 3 minutes, I will say this. There's an old saying in data science that is extremely true, and that is that all models are wrong,
Mm-hmm.
but some are interesting.
This saying, all models are wrong, some are useful, is one of these deep, philosophical, almost mystical insights that analysts learn on their journey as they master their craft.
Yes. I love that saying.
Yeah. So I will say this, right? Even in uh, causal AI, causal analytics, the stuff that we do, right? It can handle a lot of things that nothing else can handle. It's one of the reasons why it's a cornerstone of the scientific method. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But as you learn, you part of learning is knowing something that you didn't know before, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the unknown unknowns, right? The unknown unknowns are what compromises all models. And so, do we get good enough? So we call it fit for purpose levels of accuracy? Yeah, without doubt, no question, right? And not just proof. It kind of works that way across the board. But what you're essentially saying is there's something called multivariable regression, and that means that you take all of these factors, stuff you control, stuff you don't control, and you put them into a multivariable regression model, and certain things start to happen, right?
Uh-huh.
Historically, it will give you a stack rank of relative causality against a particular outcome that you've identified.
Okay.
It will give you the time lag of each piece.
Okay.
It will give you a cumulative as well, right? It will then also take that and forecast it forward. So we're not
Mm-hmm.
talking about just like forecasting revenue. We're talking about forecasting the causal relationships that will turn into a particular outcome.
Okay. And
So,
this is what proof does. This
yes,
is what proof does.
that's correct.
Okay.
And so it
Gotcha.
actually operates exactly like a GPS. So,
Okay.
so the GPS on your phone says, hey, I know where you are. And you say, yeah, but I want to go over here. And
Gotcha.
then it gives you three suggested routes, which are forecasts. And you pick one.
Okay. And try it.
And what those routes are forecasting is all of the current externalities, what's happening in each one of those routes, right?
Uh-huh.
And what is that going to mean to you as somebody who's trying to get from point A to point B? And so then you're cruising along, right? You're making good time, everything's good. And then all of a sudden something that you can't even see yet happens far ahead, right?
Uh-huh.
Traffic starts to pile up. The GPS notes this, says, hey, Nat, guess what? This was a really, really, really good route to value,
Uh-huh.
but it's not anymore. And
Right.
if you don't change, you're going to be 3 hours late. But if
Right.
we,
Right.
but if we reroute you this way, you'll be 8 minutes late.
Right.
So can we please do that?
And so what you mean, like to put this in practical terms for a marketer, you could say, okay, I've got this revenue now. I want to get to this. And your model tells you, well, here are three routes, and one includes these levers. So you amp up this channel, you amp up that campaign, whatever that is. But then your traffic, in your analogy, would be a competitor comes on the market with a new product that you didn't know they were going to release,
Yeah, or a recession hits or
or a
what?
recession hits. Yeah,
Yeah.
whatever it is. There's a pandemic, something happens.
Yeah, or your CEO has a major scandal, right? So your brand
Right.
toast, right? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So then it says, okay, now this is happening. You need to do something else over here. That is what you're essentially giving us.
That is correct.
Okay. Interesting. This sounds nuanced. Like, I think most marketers are going to be listening to this and thinking like, how could it possibly?
'Cause it-
you know?
'cause it-
How could they? Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Well, life is nuanced,
Right.
right? And life is constantly changing.
Mhm.
And so you've got to keep up.
Right.
So a difference between what we're doing, even though it's largely the same math, right? What we're doing, the difference between what we're doing and old style marketing mix modeling is that an MMM model is a really huge mega model that tries to
Mhm.
explain everything in one model and is recalculated maybe once a year, maybe twice a year.
Okay.
And so by the time it's recalculated and interpreted and given to the marketing team, even the forecasts are in the past for the most part.
Right, right. Yeah.
And so we're saying that's crap,
Right.
right? It's not crap because it's bad math. It's great math. There's nothing wrong with the math. It's about its operational readiness,
Right.
right? And
Mhm.
so, like being able to forecast so what happens in proof, okay, is that you create a model, it starts, it calculates everything up, it gives you the forecast, and then every time new data is presented to the model, which is typically either weekly or monthly in most
Mhm.
companies, it automatically recalculates the model. And so if there is a difference between the forecast and reality, it will point that out and it will show you what in the model is accounting for that difference. And if that difference persists, then you can say, okay, you know what? We need to make an adjustment here because clearly this is pushing on us in a way and having an effect on what we're doing that we don't necessarily like or want. And so we're going to make adjustments to our mix to essentially overcome that headwind or whatever that would be, right?
That's great. So it's more of a proactive analytics tool. I mean, it's an analytics tool with a layer of insights and recommendations that easily allow you to make decisions for the future rather than you having to go back, analyze the past, you know,
Yeah.
take a moment. Like you're just allowed to be more proactive in your engagement with this tool.
That's exactly it. And we there was a CMO that was up on stage, and he made this is like a year ago, and he made a comment. I was in the audience, and he's like, "I love proof because it means I'm never wrong anymore." And I'm kind of like, "Oh shit!" Right?
Oh, wow.
And so I,
Bold statement.
yeah, right. No, no kidding, And I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna be drowning in questions about this, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I
Why
walked.
did you overmarket us, sir?
Yeah, right, exactly, right. And so I went up to him and I said, "Hey, man, I really appreciate it, but," and he's like, "But it's true," and I'm like, "Well, what do you mean it's true?"
Yeah.
Okay, he's like, "I never don't arrive anymore." Yeah,
yeah, got
I
it.
may
Yeah,
be
yeah, yeah.
late, but then you give me an explainable reason, what's called an explainable variance, right?
Yeah,
And,
right,
and he goes,
right.
so I'm actually never wrong anymore. In the same way that when you started using your GPS on your phone, you might be a little bit late, but you never were like just missed the whole thing because you got lost.
You always get there. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like,
Well,
okay. I said, how about next time we maybe reword it a little bit?
that's awesome. That is really funny. Well, we are a little over time. I don't want to keep you too long, but I do want to this has been a phenomenal conversation, first of all. I've learned a lot, and I hope our audience has learned a lot. And I've also gained a lot of very cool analogies to repeat. So thank you for that.
Sure.
Um, but I do want to ask, what are 3 books, podcasts, movies, what would you recommend to our audience in any subject?
Sure thing. I will give you my picks, and I'll tell you why very quickly on each one. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So the movie Dunkirk. Right.
Oh, it's so good.
Right.
It's so good.
And and particularly in the context of being an entrepreneur in a startup situation, all that kind of stuff. Right. The big lesson that it communicated to me was living to fight again tomorrow is necessary, but it is
Mhm.
not victory.
Wow.
Right. And so the fact that the British were able to extract almost all of their forces from the French coast and return them safely to the UK was in a wonderful, wonderful thing, but it was not victory.
Mhm.
And I think that
Mhm.
we all, and even Churchill kind of made that distinction in his speech in Parliament, right? So I think it's an important, enduring thing, because a lot of times in the absence of good news, we will make some good news, right? Um,
Right.
Oppenheimer.
Very
Oppenheimer
good.
is all about the law of unintended consequences,
Mhm. Mhm.
and I think, particularly given the fact that it was released in the middle of Gen AI and all that kind of stuff, right, is a
Yeah.
cautionary tale that every single technology leader, regardless of what exact function how you're involved in technology, needs to
Mhm.
be thinking about very, very seriously, right? Because it's very seductive, and but then once you have accomplished what you thought you wanted to accomplish, you typically run into other things that you spend the next century dealing with, right? So,
Yep.
I think we just need to be very smart there. That's the kind of that one. Darkest Hour,
Mhm.
another great Churchill movie, right?
Of course. Of
Um,
course.
this is also about the reality of entrepreneurship,
Mhm.
the reality of suffering, personal
Mhm.
suffering, right? So you see
Right.
him move in this movie from dysfunction and despair. Like there's this one scene where he's in his private phone office and he's talking to President Roosevelt, right? And Roosevelt's not really helping him too much. He's not
Yeah.
getting the support that he really needed, and then there's this FDR is signing off, and he goes, "Oh, I need to let you go. It must be really late there." And Churchill kind of under his breath says, "You have no idea," right?
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
any founder has been there.
Right. Right. Relatable.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, thank you so much. This has been incredible. I feel like we're going to need a follow up podcast at some point, but it was so good to get into it with you, get started. I appreciate it so much. We'll hear more from you in the future, but from everybody listening, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Chat soon.
All
Bye
right.
bye.
See you.
You've just listened to an episode of Giant Leaps for Brandkind. This is the podcast where I talk to business and thought leaders around the globe about growing businesses through the power of brand.
If you want to support this effort, giving me a rating or review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Audible helps so much. And of course, if you're interested in marketing or brand support, you can find my contact information at nattinatlennox.com. That's NATINATLENNOX.com. Cheers.